In this video, we're going to be talking about 3 easy and practical songwriting tips. Let's dive right in. So the first practical tip has to do with starting your song, as this is one of the hard parts of songwriting, right? The start of it. For starting your song, I highly recommend you actually start with something that is important. So the reason I say this is that a lot of times people will start with the chord progression. But really, the chord progression, who remembers a song by the chord progression, right? Can you even hum the chord progression of some of your favorite songs? Probably not. But you know what you can hum? The melody. You know what else you can probably hum? The main hook of that song, whether it's a guitar hook or a piano hook, right? Think like Clocks by Coldplay. For sure, you can probably hum the melody of that song. You probably can also hum, or at least hear in your head, that piano riff. But I bet you don't even know what the chord progression is. Even if you are a songwriter, unless you have perfect pitch, and even if you do have perfect pitch, you might have just never cared enough to actually pay attention to that. And the reality is, songwriting is like a funnel. At the top, you have a lot of creative room, but as you keep going in your songwriting, you have less and less creative room until at the end, you have a song that comes out. So I recommend using the most creative space for the most important things, like lyrics, like the melody, and like hooks. Now, this is not to say to never start with the chord progression, but just be aware that it might be better to actually start with something else. Whatever you start with in your song is going to set the tone for the rest of the song. So it's an extra bonus if you can actually write something that you feel really passionate about, like a really cool melody or a really cool piano hook or guitar riff that makes you excited to keep writing that song. Practical tip number 2 is that when you're songwriting and you're stuck on a certain section, play up until you get to that song section and then try to improvise from there to sort of feel where the song should go. So for example, if you have a verse and a chorus, but you haven't written your bridge yet, you might want to play the end of your chorus and then just try something. Maybe you change up the chord that you're going to. For example, maybe for the verse, you went back to the 5 chord. But maybe, because it's the bridge, you want to do something different, go to the 6 chord instead. And even if you can't improvise yet, what you can do is at least just try to sing the single next note. So once you finish your chorus, sing a note. Try it. Maybe it will be something that resonates with you. And if you're in a scenario where for some reason you cannot even do that, sometimes just take the moment to listen in your head to the song, how you hear the final arrangement of it, all the way up until the point that you haven't written yet, and then hear where you think the song should go. Does that next part need to explode? Does it need to be something that gets really small? Does it need to continue the same vibe that the song had directly before? Whatever you hear in your head, then try to translate that into actually writing the song. Now, this may sound obvious, but a lot of people actually try to just write a song section all on its own off to the side and see if it fits. And certainly this is something you can do, but it's a lot easier if you really try to feel where the song is trying to go and you follow where the song wants to go. And my third practical songwriting tip is to break down the songwriting process into smaller steps. One of the biggest reasons that it becomes really difficult to write a song is that we try to do too much at once instead of concentrating on doing one small baby step at a time. You wouldn't try to complete a whole marathon without taking a little rest and grabbing some water. So in the same way, we can take the overwhelm of trying to write an entire song and really reduce it by breaking it down into small checkpoints or small steps. If you're staring at a blank page and you're saying to yourself, I need to write a song, you're skipping so many steps. You don't even know what your idea is. You don't even know what your song is about yet, and you're going to try to write lyrics that maybe rhyme, that have meter. That's going to be incredibly difficult, so break it down into steps. And when it comes to lyrics, I actually have a 6-step lyric writing checklist that will take you through my 6 steps that I go through to really break down the lyric writing process into smaller steps to give better results at the end of the day and also to make it easier. Another reason why it's really important to break your songwriting down into steps is a lot of times we don't have 3 hours straight to dedicate to songwriting. We might have 15 minutes here, a half hour there, 5 minutes over here. And in those circumstances, we want to be able to feel like we took at least a step in the right direction with our songwriting. And in the case of you just staring at a blank page or saying to yourself, let's write a song out of nowhere, probably what's going to happen is just nothing for 15 minutes. You're just going to have cognitive dissonance. But if you break it down into small steps, and maybe you were just trying to, for example, write a hook, or just come up with interesting song ideas, or come up with song titles that you like. That is a small step. But for example, if you happen to have some pictures that represent the idea of your song, and you also have some prose writing that's sort of fleshing out the background of your song, maybe fleshing out the character a little bit, now it's going to be a lot easier to start writing some practice lyrics for this song. And a lot of them might not end up making the final cut, and that's okay. You're just going through sort of this drafting process, this development process, where you're writing a whole bunch of lyrics and trying to figure out, okay, what should my storyline be? Where should this song go? I've sort of fleshed out the background, and maybe you've even come up with a storyline in your previous step. Breaking your songwriting process down into smaller steps also can help you to be really productive even in times that you really don't have much time to dedicate to songwriting. A lot of times we might not have 3 hours straight to dedicate to songwriting, to really get into the zone, but we might have 15 minutes here, 5 minutes over there, and 30 minutes over here. So in those times, how can we make sure we can actually be productive towards our songwriting goals? It's certainly going to be hard to pull that off if we're staring at a blank page saying to ourselves, write a song, or if we sit at our keyboard and say, time to write a song. But if we break it down into steps, maybe we say, okay, I'm going to sit at my piano and write a bass line, or I'm going to sit at my guitar and come up with a guitar hook, or I'm just going to write down a bunch of ideas for songs that I have, or I'm going to develop this song idea a bit more, flesh it out before I actually force myself to start trying to write lyrics when I have to care about meter and I might have to care about rhyming. Instead, let's develop the story first. Let's develop the character. Let's get an idea of some of the words we want to use, maybe some of the symbolism we want to use. So overall, breaking your songwriting down into steps will also make you less inspiration reliant, because you're so inspiration reliant when you stare at a blank page and say to yourself, write a song, because you're trying to skip a whole bunch of steps in the middle, and then you're really kind of relying on the muse to just like gift you a whole bunch of information. Whereas if you break things down into small steps, like for example, you have a lyric that you mostly like, a second verse, and then you say to yourself, there's something about it that just doesn't quite work. Then you can say to yourself, okay, I'm going to take 10 minutes and I'm just going to go through a thesaurus. I think that verb is not very good. I said love, for example. Love is not that specific, right? I mean, I love chocolate, I love my dog, I love my wife, I love Star Wars, right? Like, those are not all the same. I don't, for example, adore all of those things. Adore is a better word. If you go to thesaurus.com or pull out a book thesaurus, if you live in the Stone Ages still, you can actually look up some of your words and see if there are better, more visceral, more emotive words that will make your song shine so much more. And the first thing to look for, by the way, is verbs. If you want more on that, be sure to check out that 6-step lyric writing checklist that I mentioned, because I have a whole step called iterative lyric editing or iterative lyric writing that I have as step 5 of that checklist, my personal favorite, and it's sort of about what I was just talking about. And I know I said only 3 tips, but just as a bonus, inspiration is overrated and perspiration is underrated. Inspiration is great for gathering ideas, but at the end of the day, ideas are cheap. If everybody who had a good idea became a millionaire, then everybody would be millionaires, because everybody has tons and tons and tons of ideas. In fact, I would argue probably most people do have million-dollar business ideas, but they're not going to actually do the work. So it's worthless. It doesn't do anything. I've been watching a lot of Shark Tank lately. How many times do the sharks ever say, oh, that's a great idea, I'm just going to hand you money? They care about the financials. They care about how well the business is run. A good idea is worth almost nothing. Sure, it's a good starting place, right? I'm not denying that. But a good idea without good execution, irrelevant. If it's a good idea with bad execution, it's going to be bad. If it's a bad idea with good execution, it actually might be quite good. And overall, you're going to be most productive when you are inspired. Inspiration is kind of like throwing gasoline on a fire. It sort of really helps it grow very quickly. But at the end of the day, gasoline isn't enough to maintain a fire. You need wood. You need something that is going to slowly burn over time and will keep going and be steady and be reliable. The gasoline is not going to be reliable. It's going to cause a big flame. It will help things catch fire, but then it's going to disappear as quickly as it came. So ultimately, at the end of the day, while inspiration is a great songwriting accelerator, it's a great songwriting starter, it's not something that we want to or really can afford to rely on. So be sure to sometimes just put in the work. Don't wait for the muse. Don't wait for inspiration. put in the work. And breaking things down into steps really allows you to do that because you're less reliant on that muse, and you can have a lot of steps in the process that really are almost more scientific or almost more of a practical thing than it is a creative thing. Like with the thesaurus example that I gave before, it might be slightly creative, but it certainly doesn't require the muse or require inspiration for you to take your lyric that so far is pretty good but feels like it needs a little work and just look up a word like, we'll take love again. You look up love in the thesaurus and it says adore, and you're like, that's a better word. That wasn't a really creative process per se. It was kind of creative, maybe. You had to choose which word was the most precise. But overall, that's something that you can do even when you're not feeling inspired. And your song absolutely got better when you changed from a word like love that is fairly vague and then maybe got more specific like a word like adore. So hopefully this was helpful to you, and if it was, be sure to drop a like. It helps me out with the YouTube algorithm, and if you haven't already, also be sure to check out that 6-step lyric writing checklist that I mentioned. It will help walk you through the 6 steps that I go through and really developing a lyric instead of just writing a lyric, because I think writing is sometimes a word that confuses people, right? Sometimes it feels like, for example, when you're talking about writing a book, people imagine that somebody like types at a computer the book and that the final version they get is basically that. But that's not how it goes at all, right? There's a lot of editing that's involved. There's a lot of world building that happens before they even write a page of the book. There's a lot of character development that they do, right? So in a similar way, we need to do some groundwork. We need to do some steps along the way before we have a finished song, a finished lyric specifically here. And certainly it doesn't take as much as a book, because a book is huge and a song is not that huge. But it's the same idea. It needs to be broken down to steps. It will be so much easier for you, and it will result in a much, much better song. It certainly has helped me a ton, so I'm sure it will help you as well. Be sure to check that out. Link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you next time.